This guitar is 106 years old. What does it sound like? So you probably already know Gibson for making iconic electric instruments such as the Les Paul, the SG, the Flying V, and to a lesser extent the Firebird and the Explorer. But they've actually been around for a whole lot longer than just for the history of electric instruments. This right here is a Gibson style L-3 acoustic guitar, serial number 39509, which according to acousticmusic.org places it at very early 1918 or very late 1917 approximately. Either way, it's over 100 years old. You want to know how you can tell it's old? Because it says the Gibson on the headstock. Not just Gibson, the Gibson. And it's still hanging in there. I actually have a very personal history with this instrument. This is my dad's. It's been in the family for a pretty long time. It was my granddad's before it passed to my dad. You might not be able to tell just from looking at me or listening to my voice, but I'm actually quite the country boy. I was born in western North Carolina in the heart of Appalachia, and western North Carolina is still my home to this day. And there's a lot of folk music that comes from around here that we call old-time music that was very influential in the development of what we call country music today, and to a lesser extent, I guess, rock and roll as well. My parents are both practitioners of the traditional folk music of Appalachia, and so, growing up, I heard them playing all the time. They dragged me with them to various old-time music conventions and events. It was only natural that eventually I picked up the instruments myself and started to play the music. So, for a good portion of my youth, I was playing old-time music. And because this guitar was my dad's, whenever I would jam with him, or whenever he would show me things on the guitar, or whenever, he was just playing by himself, I would hear this instrument. Pretty much from the moment I was born, I was hearing this instrument. So it's a very special instrument to me for that reason. Its sound has been ingrained into my memory for my entire childhood. Now, I've played a lot of acoustic instruments in my time. I've definitely played more acoustic guitars, far more acoustic guitars than I have played electric guitars. So I guess you could say I'm slightly more qualified to speak about acoustic instruments than electric instruments. And it's also the oldest instrument that I know of that I've ever gotten access to. So because of those reasons, I thought that it would be interesting to do a video about it. And because it's so old, the first thing that I want to do is look up some official Gibson literature from the time and see what they had to say about the instrument back then. Alright, let's take a look here and see what we can figure out. I found this 1921 Gibson catalog, The First Serious Instruments of the Mandolin and Guitar Family Ever Manufactured. So Martin doesn't count at all. Well, they did say mandolin and guitar, so I guess they can lay claim to that. Who wants to buy an instrument its own manufacturer won't guarantee longer than a year, or at most 5 years, if it's just as good as the Gibson? If it really has the quality value that endures, why won't its manufacturer give it just as good a guarantee? 1920s advertisements were wild, man. And now here we go. Here is what I have. The Gibson guitar, style L-3. You'll also notice from the side profile that it's an archtop instrument and that it originally was supposed to have a pick guard. This instrument does not have its pick guard, and as you might be able to tell from the side profile, it is no longer an archtop. It sat unplayed for many years because the decades of age finally started to take their toll, and like the wood warped and made it kind of unplayable. So a few years ago, when my dad eventually decided to get it finally fixed up and in a playable state, it had to be de-arch topified. To what degree that affects the sound quality, I do not know, but definitely not enough for it to lose its character. My sense memory tells me that it sounds much the same today as it did when I was a kid. Mahogany neck, spruce top, pearl inlays, and this goofy tailpiece. They definitely don't make tailpieces like this anymore. Look at the bridge. It looks like a stretched violin bridge. It's also really cool to scroll through this catalog and see what other kind of goofy instruments they were making at the time just because they could. The 1920s had a lot of really goofy instrument mashups. You had banjo mandolins, you had banjo guitars, you had banjo cellos, you had mando cellos, which I guess is just a super big mandolin with low pitched strings. Look at this thing. Look at this thing. This was an actual instrument that existed at some point in time, that was actually sold to people at some point in time. The Gibson Mando bass. Oh man, the harp guitar. This is one of the goofiest instruments that you'll ever see in your entire life. Yes, these things do exist. I have not seen them in use outside of niche applications. I've seen some videos from the 1920s with these things in them. I think that was probably the only time in history where these things were ever in anything resembling widespread use. But still, they're such a cool looking instrument. Even if it's completely impractical for everyday use, it is such a cool looking instrument. So this catalog's really cool and all. The one thing that I'm missing is the price of the instrument. I want to know how much these cost back then. This catalog does not appear to show the price on the page itself. Apparently there was supposed to be a price list attached to the inside of the front cover, and that doesn't appear to have made it into this PDF scan of the catalog. However, I did find a catalog from 1903 that lists the price of a style L-3 guitar as $75.35. This catalog has a really interesting tidbit in it. Note, the back of Gibson guitars should never be held flat against the clothing as it impedes vibration. How come nobody's talking about this these days? Like, people are talking about tone, but nobody's talking about how much your own body dampens the guitar. So, in 1903, one of these guitars cost $75.35. I found another catalog from 1928 that lists the same guitar as costing $100. Now, if we adjust that for inflation, this guitar would have cost over $1,800 in 1928, and over $2,500 in 1903. So there you have it. Gibsons are called overpriced today. Well, they were always that expensive, as it turns out. It's really interesting to get this insight about the kind of stuff that Gibson was making back then, as well as the goofy advertisements. Now that we've taken a look at that, I want to talk about the way the instrument plays, the way it feels, and a little bit more detail about the sound quality. It is a very light instrument. It doesn't have both pins for a strap on it, so I can't tell you whether or not it neck dives. It feels very interesting in the hands. Not sure how well you can pick this up on camera, but the neck feels kind of chubby. Like, it's strangely fat feeling if you're used to more modern instruments. Action isn't too bad, could be a little bit better. Before my dad had all that work done to it, the action was way worse than it is now, way higher, impossible to play anything. Again, it's all because the wood was warping and the instrument was getting thrown out of shape. But now it's something resembling normal. The neck is slightly bowed. I'm fairly certain this isn't one of the guitars where you can just adjust the truss rod to address that issue, so it is what it is. However, as you can tell with the dual harmonized stuff in the intro, it actually intonates not that terribly badly, and it actually holds its tuning pretty well too. I've had it in the case for the last few days since I filmed the intro segment, and I think it's still pretty well in tune. Of course, that could also be because it's old and it doesn't like being tuned very much. These pegs are quite difficult to turn, and they're not very precise at all. This one, the peg for the low E, is actually loose. Like, the actual tuner isn't loose, but the peg is loose on the shaft. So, you know, you can twist it uselessly for a little bit before it actually starts to grab the tuner and actually tighten or loosen the string. Not the greatest feeling in the world, but hey, what do you expect? It's over 100 years old. I do really like the design of these tuners though. Like look, they've got those engravings in them. Actually, I really like the design of this whole thing. This is a really good looking instrument. Like it still looks so cool despite its age. Imagine what this thing must have looked like brand new. Those tuners must have looked like jewelry. The whole thing must have looked like jewelry. I mean, I would expect it to in today's money. It's a $2,000 instrument. This guitar is such a vibe in looks, feel, and in sound. I haven't even gotten to the sound quality yet. If I play acoustic guitar, I'm usually playing a pretty big one, like Dreadnought size. And I love big Dreadnought acoustic guitars because of their huge booming sound. It really helps you cut through and be present sounding in like a square dance setting or a really frenzied jam setting, especially if you don't have a bass player and you've got to be the one locking down the rhythm. But Dreadnoughts do that with their big booming low end. This thing has a sound that would still allow it the ability to cut, but it's more focused in the mid-range. It doesn't have a whole terribly lot of bass information going on, but it's tight bass. And the mid-range isn't excessively honky. Another reason that I like bigger acoustic guitars is because they often have a more scooped out sound in the mid-range, ergo less honky sounding. But this thing has a tastefully done mid-range. It's certainly a very distinctive character. Not a whole ton of sparkle coming off of it. That could be because these strings are probably very old. I don't know how long it's been since these have been changed. I honestly kind of don't want to change them because the old strings combined with the age of the guitar and the way the guitar sounds, it just adds to the vibe. And because, you know, this is an acoustic instrument with one-of-a-kind physical properties, it's got a truly unique sound. Acoustic instruments aren't like electric instruments. Electric instruments are so much of a simpler system. With an electric instrument, pretty much all you're hearing is the moving metal across the pickup. And, you know, that's something that you can replicate from guitar to guitar. Jim Lill demonstrated this in his very interesting Where Does the Tone Come From in an Electric Guitar video. But this thing is an acoustic system. Just like how every guitar speaker cabinet sounds different, how every guitar speaker sounds different, even if they're the same model of speaker or speaker cabinet. This instrument has a unique sound. And because it's so old, playing and listening to an instrument like this is a really cool way to step into the past and hear the sounds of that time. By modern standards, it has its flaws, but for old-time music and folk music, I think it's a great instrument. Again, this instrument means a lot to me personally, and now that I've told its story and what I think about it, I'm just going to end the video with some more sound examples. All the sound examples that you're hearing in this video are recorded with a single SM81 with the bass roll-off on, and no EQ or post-processing after the fact. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to the story of this guitar. My handle is Lord of Emeralds. Now let's just listen to this thing some more.